In 1933, a citizen of the United States could walk into a bank with a $20 paper bill and walk out with approximately 1 ounce of pure gold. To the modern mind, this feels like a fairy tale, a world where money wasn't just a digital entry or a promise from a government, but a physical claim on a heavy yellow element forged in the heart of dying stars. But what if I told you that this rigid connection to a shiny metal wasn't just a quaint tradition, but a global economic straitjacket that simultaneously built the modern world and nearly destroyed it? We think of the gold standard as a symbol of stability, a golden age of fixed prices and honest trade. In reality, it was a complex, fragile machine, a giant feedback loop that synchronized the heartbeats of every major empire on Earth. When one nation breathed, the others felt the pressure in their lungs. To understand why we moved away from it, we have to stop looking at gold as jewelry and start looking at it as a logistical protocol, the original global operating system. The core thesis is simple. The gold standard provided the world with its first universal language of value, but it lacked a reset button. It was a system built for a world of slow trade and stationary capital, and it shattered the moment the 20th century demanded flexibility. Before the internet, before Swift codes, and before the IMF, the world had a self-regulating heartbeat. Imagine the global economy as a series of interconnected water tanks. Each tank is a country, and the water inside is gold. Under the classical gold standard of the late 19th century, the rules were absolute. If a country exported more than it imported, gold flowed into its tanks. If it bought too much from abroad, the gold flowed out. This wasn't just a ledger entry, it was a mechanical correction known as the Price-Specie Flow Mechanism. Let's look at the plumbing. If a nation like Great Britain exported massive amounts of wool and steel to France, the French had to pay in gold. As chests of bullion moved across the English Channel, Britain's tank filled up. Because their currency was fixed to gold, more gold meant they could circulate more money. But basic economics tells us that when more money chases the same amount of goods, prices rise. Suddenly, British steel became expensive. Conversely, France, having lost gold, had to shrink its money supply. Prices in Paris dropped. Eventually, the British started buying cheap French wine, and the gold flowed back to France. It was a beautiful, automated cycle, a world without high inflation, where a British pound in 1820 bought roughly the same amount of bread as a pound in 1910. However, this mechanical beauty masked a brutal reality. The system required internal flexibility. For the water levels to balance, wages and prices had to be able to fall as easily as they rose. If gold left your country, the only way to get it back was to make your citizens cheaper, cutting wages, lowering costs, and enduring a recession until your goods were attractive to the world again. In this era, the internal economy was sacrificed at the altar of external stability. The gears of industry turned with terrifying efficiency, but the humans caught in those gears had no safety net. There was no central bank to print a way out of a downturn. You simply waited for the gold to return, or you starved. The clockwork world relied on one fundamental assumption: a frictionless, peaceful global market. For the system to work, gold had to move freely across borders, like data packets on a fiber optic cable. But in 1914, the machinery of global trade was fed into a meat grinder. World War I wasn't just a military conflict, it was a total systemic failure. Total war requires infinite resources, and you cannot fight a total war on a fixed budget of gold. The physical reality of the trenches demanded more shells, more fuel, and more bread than the world's gold mines could ever provide. One by one, the great powers committed the ultimate economic sin. They uncoupled their currencies from the metal. They began printing fiat money, currency backed by nothing but the promise of victory. The water tanks were disconnected, and the pipes were blocked. Governments issued massive war bonds and printed paper to pay for millions of soldiers. By 1918, the Price-Specie mechanism was dead. Some countries, like Germany, had printed so much that their currency was becoming wallpaper. Others, like Britain, were buried in debt to the United States. When the smoke finally cleared, the world tried to do something incredibly dangerous. It tried to go back. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, returned Britain to the gold standard at the pre-war rate. It was a matter of national pride, but it was a logistical catastrophe. The prices had changed, the debt had grown, and the socio-economic soil had shifted. Labor unions were now powerful. People were no longer willing to accept the 20% wage cuts required to make the old gold price work. The logistical backbone of the world was now brittle glass, held together by ego and nostalgia. By the late 1920s, the gold standard had transformed from a stabilizing force into a transmission belt for disaster. This is where system thinking reveals the tragedy. A tool designed to prevent local crises ended up synchronizing a global one. In 1929, the US stock market bubble burst. In a normal world, the Federal Reserve might have lowered interest rates to encourage spending, but under the gold standard, they couldn't. If they lowered rates, investors would take their gold to London or Paris, where rates were higher. To protect their gold reserves, the Fed did the unthinkable. They raised interest rates in the middle of a collapse. Imagine a group of mountain climbers tied together by a single rigid rope. If one climber slips and falls down a crevasse, the rope doesn't save them. It pulls everyone else over the edge. This was the Golden Fetters effect. Because every major currency was pegged to the dollar and gold, the American deflation became a global contagion. As banks failed in New York, gold fled the US. To stop the bleed, the US hiked rates. This forced Britain and France to hike their rates to keep their gold from flowing to the US. It was a race to the bottom. The system was now a positive feedback loop of destruction. Farmers couldn't pay their debts because the real value of their loans was growing as the value of money rose. Factories closed because no one could afford the high interest on business loans. The more the world clung to the security of gold, the more the global economy strangled itself to death. The climax of this drama didn't happen in a battle, but in the frantic wood-paneled halls of central banks. By 1931, the pressure reached a fever pitch. Speculators realized that the British didn't have enough gold to back all their paper pounds. A run on the British Empire began. In September 1931, Great Britain, the very architect of the system, was forced to admit the impossible. They snapped the golden rope. They went off gold. The pundits predicted the end of the world, but something strange happened. The British economy began to breathe again. Freed from the straitjacket, they could finally lower interest rates. They could let the pound's value drop, making British exports cheap and sparking a manufacturing recovery. The data from the 1930s is hauntingly clear. The sooner a country abandoned the gold standard, the faster it recovered. Those who stayed on gold out of morality or tradition, like France and the United States, suffered through years of unnecessary breadlines and bank failures. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the lesson to heart. He didn't just leave the gold standard, he made it illegal for U.S. citizens to own large amounts of gold bullion. He realized that in a modern industrial democracy, you cannot prioritize the price of a yellow metal over the survival of 130 million people. The system had to be managed by humans, not by a mechanical reflex. This transition was finalized in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference, where the world moved to a gold exchange system. And finally in 1971, when Richard Nixon closed the gold window entirely. The divorce was complete. We moved from a world of physical constraints to a world of human trust and human fallibility. Why does this matter to a viewer in the 21st century? Because we are currently living through the greatest money experiment in human history. Since 1971, we have operated on a system of pure credit. This has allowed for unprecedented growth and the ability to print trillions of dollars to stop global pandemics in their tracks. But it has also led to massive debt bubbles and a slow, grinding erosion of purchasing power. This is the Fiat trade-off. We traded the stability of the gold standard for the flexibility of the printing press. When you look at the rise of Bitcoin or the gold bugs on financial forums, you are seeing a systemic rejection of human discretion. People are once again looking for a golden straitjacket, a system where the rules are written in math, code, or physics, gold, rather than by a committee of central bankers. They want to go back to the water tanks where the supply is fixed and no one can cheat. But history gives us a warning. A fixed system is a rigid system. If we tied the global economy to Bitcoin or gold today, we would regain price stability, but we would lose the reset button. In the next global crisis, we would find ourselves once again tied together on that mountain peak, unable to cut the rope as we all pull each other into the abyss. The gold standard taught us that money is not a thing, It's a social protocol. It's a tool for coordination across borders. Whether that tool is made of heavy metal, green paper, or encrypted blocks of data, its value doesn't come from its scarcity, but from its ability to facilitate human cooperation. The Golden Age was an incredible era of growth, but it was also an incredible era of cruelty, because the system lacked empathy. It treated the economy like a machine and ignored the people living inside the gears. As we move deeper into a digital economy, the tension between rules and discretion remains the central conflict of our time. We want the honesty of gold, but we need the flexibility of fiat. The question for the next generation isn't which metal to back our money with, but how to build a social contract that can bend during a storm without breaking. Because as the 1930s proved, the moment a system becomes more important than the people it serves, the system has already failed. The only thing more dangerous than a currency that loses its value is a currency that loses its humanity. Understanding these hidden systems is the only way to navigate the financial storms of the future. If you found this breakdown of the global operating system valuable, join our community by hitting the subscribe button. We release new visual deep dives every week, uncoupling the complex gears of history and economics. Click the bell icon to make sure you never miss a blueprint. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Are we due for a return to a fixed system like Bitcoin, or is the flexibility of human-managed money our only hope? Let's start the conversation below. Thanks for watching.